Alright, we've talked about how to lap that log. We've talked about how to clean that log. Now let's talk about the all too important dip drive leading into your press or jerk. So compared to the other videos in this series, this one is not going to take very long because when it comes to your dip drive mechanics, there are really only a few key things to talk about as we've already discussed your rack position. And number one would be your stance width. You'll see on screen here we've got a couple little illustrations talking about the importance of where we place our feet. When our feet go well outside of hip to shoulder width, what happens is rather than having pure vertical transference of that force, you're integrating in a lateral element of it, right? You're triangulating it. Whereas when we keep them a little more in line with the hips and shoulders, you're going to get more direct vertical transference, which is going to generally result in a better push press. Now, on the other side of that is talking about the depth of your dip drive with the log. This is a really common technique error. A lot of folks will dip way too low. And what happens is that excessive dip depth, you actually lose your rack position because it's hard to maintain proper spinal extension while also bending your knees and not losing position. In general, your knees shouldn't be going much past your big toe at the bottom of the dip drive. The log, by and large, doesn't benefit as much from leg drive versus something such as the axle or barbell. Now, it's also worth mentioning I'm talking about push press variations versus jerk variations. Obviously, with a jerk, you're going to get a ton more benefit from the leg drive, but not just the initial dip drive, but also the catch phase, which is a different topic entirely. Now, I do think it's worth taking a second to slow down and sort of discuss strict versus push ratios when it comes to the axle and log. I don't want to have jerks in this conversation because, again, the recovery phase on a jerk changes the dialogue to such a degree that I don't think it's useful to have it. But when it comes to strict log versus push log, you'll find that the strict log is usually about 85 to 92% of the best push press, whereas with the axle, it's a wider gap, generally 75 to 85% of the push press. In general, you'll find that athletes who have a very strong upper back and triceps can really close the gap on their strict versus push log, whereas athletes who are very efficient with their dip drive timing on their push press can really widen the gap between their strict and push axle press. Additionally, the log itself has a much more forgiving rack position. As such, you can brute force it a lot more versus the rack with a barbell or axle. Now, as far as strengthening and reinforcing dip drive mechanics, strength itself isn't necessarily going to be a bottleneck for most folks. It's mainly going to be just skill with the movement and getting that practice of timing and tempo down. And as far as doing that, there are 4 movements that I think are really worth discussing, and they are pause dip drives with all of your push pressing variations, a blast press, high front box squats, as well as dip drives, but especially with an SSB since we are talking about the log. So when it comes to pause dip drives, these are probably my number one variation in terms of building because they're not equipment intensive. You don't need anything fancy. If you have the implement you need to be push pressing, you have everything you need. As far as programming for these, honestly, do your warm-up sets with pause dip drives. This is one of the simplest ways to get better with the implement. Additionally, you may consider replacing your typical speed work with pause dip drives here. It's a great way that slots in, and it's not overly complicated, but it yields a lot of rewards. Again, especially on something like the log, where the dip drive does tend to be a bit more shallow and a bit more fickle versus something like an axle. Now, number 2 is a blast press. This is a concentric only push press from either pins or jerk blocks. This one's really nice because what it does, it helps you learn how to time your hips in the push press. Because a lot of folks think it's just going to be leg drive from the quadriceps, but your hips actually play a big element here, so this helps you improve your timing. This is also a really nice variation to use during those times where maybe you're pushing your low back quite a bit or your legs quite a bit, such as when you're emphasizing your deadlift strength. This allows you to train your push press with not as much orthopedic or general recovery demand as well. Now, front squats to a higher up box. These are ones that aren't strictly necessary but can come in handy, just helping you get used to all that excess weight in the rack position as well as that extension over top. Instagram's not going to like them, but they're worth mixing in and playing with them just a little bit to help overload the given position. Next up would be SSB dip drives. Obviously, any form of dip drive is going to be very valuable here, but if we are talking about log specific, the SSB is particularly valuable as that awkward rack position is going to make it feel more like the log, but you're going to have the added benefit of not feeling like you're going to get choked out. And again, it's a very easy one to set up. If you're doing SSB good mornings, just knock out a few sets of these before moving into your good mornings. A few sets of 3 to 5 is all you really need here. Also, quick shout out to Josh Lancaster. He was the one who helped innovate this movement. It's a great exercise and he is an incredible lifter. So just want to make sure that he gets his appropriate credit in that capacity. So if we were to put it all together, here is what a sample week of training might look like. I'm not really going to have any set rep schemes here, but this just gives you an idea of how we can weave it all in. So for example, day one, this is our upper developmental day, where we're going to do the log blast press, dumbbell inclines, behind the neck lat pull downs, take press on a 40-degree incline, might I add. Awesome for the Tricepticons, and that 40-degree incline has a ton of transference to the log due to the layback position, Lou raises, and hammer curls. Day two is your lower max effort day. We're going to hit the max effort deadlift, our SSB dip jerks there. Then we're going to do some SSB good mornings, leg curls, sled drags, and ab wheel. Then day three, upper max effort, we're going to do a fun little complex here where you go Viper to a pause dip drive push press, to a push press, to a jerk, some half kneeling landmine presses, chest dips, not just the dip drive, face pulls, skull crushers, and press downs. And then the final day of the training week, paused front squats. And again, this is our developmental day. That paused front squat, awesome for building leg strength, upper back strength, as well as improving the rack position. Then we're going to do that high box front squat just for a few sets, get a little bit of overload. Fat neutral grip rows, sandbag over bar, a snatch grip barbell back extensions, and planks. So you can see throughout the entire week, we don't get too far away from helping improve specific physical attributes that improve your log performance, or do movements that help you train the various positions necessary for improving on the log. So that really wraps up today's video. Like I said, this is going to be a very brief one because when it comes to the dip drive, it's simply a matter of perfecting your position rather than maximal overload when it comes to this particular phase of the log. Also, make sure to follow me over on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrabio. Lastly, I do offer one-to-one coaching. It's what I do full-time. Odds are really good. I'd love to work with you, but I'll see you folks in the next video.